What would you do if I told you that the weather patterns aloft across the country and the globe were cycling on a regular basis, and that there was in fact order and chaos that we refer to as the jet stream and weather forecasting as a whole? By understanding what these patterns are that cycle across the globe and the patterns that are associated with them, if you know how long that pattern cycle is, you can use that information to forecast for nearly the year ahead into the future. And I will be doing that on this channel and right now in this video by putting together a couple of forecasts that should give you a great window into an early severe weather setup at the end of March and into the first couple weeks of April across the central and southern plains, possibly extending into the southeast as well. All of that as well as things that will happen before then. But first we need to understand what it is that I am talking about, and this cycling weather methodology or weather pattern cycling across the globe is referred to as the Lezak Recurring Cycle, or the LRC. To put it very, very simply, or simple, a unique weather pattern sets up every single fall our jet stream, and that pattern will be a unique number of days long until it eventually recycles through and then cycles over and over and over again until a new unique LRC pattern sets up that following fall. By understanding how long that cycle length is, you can identify when portions of that cycle or the weather pattern will re-emerge. Of course, there are so many different influences that act on it, but it is the central piece to the puzzle that is weather forecasting. The LRC knows how to predict, or is the predicting factor in what the weather patterns are going to look like at any point in time throughout the future until a new pattern sets up. And I'm going to show you this right now. Now I have a couple of upper air maps here, the 500 millibar level, 18,000 feet. This is our weather pattern, and I have these maps separated by how long the cycle is this year. Okay, so what am I going to be showing you here? First, on the left side is the second cycle of this year's LRC, and on the right side is the third cycle, and what has most recently happened with two major storms that have hit Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, all the way up into the northeast. Two big storms. We'll touch on those coming up here in just a moment. I also have two videos on each of those storms explaining how they were forecasted over a month ago, this just being a little bit more in depth, and as well what happens next after this storm. So back in our second cycle of the LRC, at least a portion of a pattern within the second cycle. Watch what happens. We have this low that is sitting off of the west coast. Now this low is going to drop into the country, and we'll see two systems that are accompanied with it. So here's the first. It splits off into two. We get one that rides along the international border. We get a second one that sits off in the Pacific a little bit longer, waits to drop down towards Colorado, and then rips across the country, getting sucked into the main flow. So we had two systems right there. What happens after that? We have a low sitting off of the Pacific Ocean off of California. That sits there for a few days before eventually getting sucked into the main flow of the jet stream, dropping down towards Mexico, strengthening and lifting through Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Maybe the reverse order of that. Got a little ahead of myself there. And then that eventually works its way across the eastern half of the country, while ridging takes place off of the Pacific Northwest, followed by a fourth system that dives in through that ridge and rides across the country, and even technically a fifth and a sixth storm behind that. Now, remember what we just took a look at. Let's look at it very quickly one more time. So we see our first storm right along the international border. So there's a second storm that drops down to the south, a cutoff low down here that forms off of Mexico, rides across the country, ridging off the Pacific Northwest, and a fourth storm that rides in off of the Pacific and then into the eastern coast of the country. Now let's look at what has just happened with the beginning of this cycle in the third cycle of this year's LRC. Here we are in January, this storm riding in off of the Pacific, and now there's going to be a little bit of influential play here. And this is going to be the Arctic Oscillation, or the polar vortex. It's cold. We all know it's been cold. That cold weather strengthens the jet stream. It pushes the storm tracks further to the south, and then return. That's what we see here. A slight variation different from cycle 2 to cycle 3. There was not cold air in cycle 2 as there is now. So here it is, coming in off of the west coast, rides in, drops down towards Kansas and Oklahoma. This is that fourth largest snowstorm for Kansas City that just hit on, what was that, the 5th of January. What happened after that? A second snowstorm. Here we go. There's our second wave right there coming in off the Pacific, drops down towards Mexico, forms, lifts into the east portion of the country. That was the snowstorm and ice storm that hit from Texas, Missouri, as well as Arkansas, Tennessee, a few of the Gulf Shore states, and into the Northeast. Now, what happens after that? We should see some ridging taking place off of the west coast, and we'll see another low that should form off of California, sit there for a few days. Remember, here it is right there. We'll see some ridging taking place off the Pacific. This storm system will chill down here, and we'll get it to do basically the same exact thing, and then we'll see a fourth system that comes in right after that. Let's go to our computer model. Let's make this nice and big, and that's what we're going to be watching. So our Texas storm just ripped through the country. Ridging will take place off of the west coast, and we're going to be watching for another storm to form. There it is, forming off of the west coast of California, and then getting sucked back into the main flow and ripping across the country. This is the same exact weather pattern that has already happened back in November, and it happened before then in October when the LRC first set up. So here's our storm system that's off of the west coast, off of California. That forms and drops down towards Mexico and then rides into the country. And what we remember happening, what we just took a look at, is we should see ridging taking place off of the Pacific or the west coast, and another storm will barrel through that ridge and drop down towards the southwest, forming into another storm. There it is right there, and lifting off into the northeast, followed by another storm following right behind it. Now again, this just model indication and model suggestion, but it coincides with the exact weather pattern that just happened. Here's our low that forms off of the coast of California, drops down to the southwest, forms, rips across the country, ridging off the Pacific Ocean. Our next storm barrels through that ridge, rides in, and there's our next storm system following after that. So knowing all of this information and using cycling pattern methodology, I can forecast when those four storms are going to rip across our country again. That first one, it's going to come around the 16th and 17th of February, followed by a second storm around the 20th and 21st of February. After that, we'll calm things down for a little bit. Right around March 2nd, we'll get another third storm that rips into this country, and then the 7th and 8th of March will be another window to keep an eye on as that fourth storm rides across the country. Now, here's the interesting part. As we head into spring, these will likely produce severe weather outbreak, and I'll hold off on highlighting an exact area for where that severe weather outbreak is going to be, but I'll forecast it right now and give you the dates. March 30th, March 31st will be our first window for a major severe weather outbreak, followed by the 3rd and 4th of April, the 13th of April, and the 18th of April will be our four main key windows for severe weather to be setting up, at least the good potential for severe weather to be setting up over those dates. We'll keep an eye on how that Arctic Oscillation plays a factor with it, as well as the NOA and ENSO. So there is your forecast again for the end of March and into the middle of April. We'll see four storm systems riding in across the country that will bring in 1 and 2 day outlooks for severe weather. And 2 or 3 of these will produce at least the potential for some major severe weather outbreaks. Again, around March 30th and 31st, the 3rd or 4th of April, around the 13th of April, and then the 18th of April is when these will set up, and you may add a day behind that as it traverses further or moves further to the east. We might see a secondary outlook with that being issued, but that is the LRC as a whole. Again, that unique weather pattern sets up and it cycles through. This portion of the pattern will reemerge past April, and if I can do quick math real quick, that should wind up back around the middle of May as well, right in time for another window for severe weather. So we'll keep an eye on this and we'll provide additional updates. Again, if you haven't seen the prior videos, go check them out. I explain these last two storms fairly good, or at least I think I do. And I want to know what you think about all of this as well. So drop some comments down below. Let me know what you think about this. And if you're a little on the fence, and I don't blame you because I was the exact same way when I was first introduced to this, I thought these people that were teaching me this were absolute quacks, until I saw it happen with my very own eyes. And you have to see it happen with your own eyes before you eventually get fully on board with this, at least in terms if you're a meteorologist. If you're just a regular person who watches the weather, and when these things play out and these forecasts verify, it doesn't take long to get on board with the whole methodology of this. So again, hit that like, subscribe button if you want to see more of these videos, and follow along, and we'll continue to provide this information and proof that the weather patterns indeed are cycling across the country and the globe.